Friday on a numbers game, Sirius XM Channel 204, the Vegas Stats and Information Network. It is a numbers game. Thanks to everybody watching us at vsin.com. Also on the new sexy VSiN app. We appreciate it. On the show today, James Salinas, Super Contest winner from 2015 and third place finisher last year in the only 2 times he's ever participated in the Super Contest, the most prestigious of all handicapping contests here in the desert. James will be with us to talk about the 2 games that he absolutely will not be playing in the Super Contest this weekend. Vinny Maliulo, our own in-house odds maker from Gone Gaming, to talk about ML season win totals as it relates to the pricing of these postseason participants. We'll get into that with Vinny. Also, his power ratings in college football versus the actual poll. Happy to have Vinny back on the show. Brent Musburger's 3 NFL picks. We'll dissect those. Whole bunch of good stuff. But first, time to do a little college football 3-on-3. It has not been great for either of us. We're slogging along in the early season, but plenty of time to make up for it in the long run. From the Last Word Cheetah podcast, also the host of the Call-In podcast with Preston Johnson. What do you know? It's Preston Johnson. Hello, Preston.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing very well. So I went 1-2 last week and gained on you. You are up on me by a game and a half, though, for the season. So I'm the one who's pulling up the rear in what has not been a first stellar month for either of us in college football.
You know, it's actually been pretty funny. I think the last 4 weeks, if you parlayed all 3 of my picks and parlayed the opposite of all 3 of my picks, you won one of them 4 weeks in a row.
That's right. That's exactly right. You're either winless or you are a clean sheet. So let's see which of those transpires this weekend. You get dibs. You're still ahead. You're up by a game and a half. You've got honors, sir.
Yeah, let's start with Toledo, -14 against Eastern Michigan at home. This is actually a game my numbers fall right at 14 anyways, but I love the spot for the Rockets. Eastern Michigan, for one, coming off a game, they went absolutely all out on the road at Kentucky. You know, their SEC, big-time Conference 5, Big 5 opponent. Probably should have won the game, actually. I think the first play, they got a fumble, scored a touchdown, they're up 7-0, and had a chance to win it anyway. The week before that, they actually beat Ohio in their MAC opener, they lost to them in over. So it's 2 pretty rough losses for Eastern Michigan in a row. On the flip side, you have a Toledo team coming off of a bye, and the 2 weeks prior to that, and this is something that, you know, you can't necessarily quantify completely, but I definitely look into it, and it definitely doesn't hurt. But it's just like a broad strength of schedule broken down by defense and offense. And Toledo gave up 50 back-to-back weeks before this bye to Miami and Tulsa. And seeing those 2 offenses having a bye now and an extra week to prepare for an Eastern Michigan offense, which isn't in the same tier at all, I think it bodes well. And obviously the defense is going to be pretty vamped up after giving up 50 in back-to-back games. So I think Toledo runs away with it. I'm laying the 14 points.
Okay, Toledo, your first game, laying the 14. I am going, I hope I'm not doing this out of order, Jorge, here. I am going with the aforementioned Kentucky Wildcats. You mentioned that, the Wildcats, when you were talking about Eastern Michigan just there. This opened at 14 in some spots, down all the way to 9.5. And now at this number, I will play the Wildcats. I will lay the 9.5 against Mizzou. Now, here's the thing. Kentucky, one very tough ending against Florida from being undefeated at 5-0. But they've got Mississippi State, Tennessee, Ole Miss up next. Then they got Vandy. This could be a really, really solid season for Kentucky. Well on their way to that already. Mizzou, on the other hand, ripped apart over a 3-game stretch now by a combined score of 117-30. Now, that being said, I'm certainly not comparing the Wildcats with any of the great teams in the country. They're only averaging 322 yards per game. They're struggling in pass protection. They're giving up way too many plays behind the line of scrimmage. Eastern Michigan, as you mentioned in that game, they came up with 5 sacks, 10 tackles for a loss against Kentucky just last week. And now Mizzou coming off some extra rest here. So there is a scenario where I could see if Mizzou gets out to a good start here, this could go askance for me pretty quickly. However, Mizzou, if they get behind, they just can't get the other team off the field on third downs. On the other hand, Kentucky seems to be really fortunate on third downs. Now, whether that's sustainable over the long haul, you never know with that. Certainly turnover margin is polar extremes with these two teams as well. Is that sustainable over the long haul? Who knows? But in this particular matchup at Kentucky, now that it's gone to 9.5, Kentucky play number one for me today.
Yeah, I don't mind it. Their season's been really weird. They've actually, you said they're 4-1. I
Yeah.
think the 4 games they've won, they probably played their worst 4 games and found ways to win. And then their best game they played all year was the Florida one, and they found a way to lose. So strange season for them so far.
Yeah, that Florida game, that Florida ending. By the way, is this where I bitch about Vanderbilt last week as well? Just a
Oh gosh.
awful beat for me as well in that one. But we were on Missouri, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe not on air, but off air. All right, number 2 for you, sir.
I am going to be betting West Virginia, plus 13.5 out there. One of my favorite, it probably is my favorite play this week. I'm going to bet them on the money line as well. My actual number for this game falls in at 7.5, so I have a big discrepancy there. And people are probably looking at TCU. Obviously, they upset Oklahoma State on the road. An Oklahoma State team that we talked about a little bit last week who found a way not to actually cover against Texas Tech. But in that TCU game, they turned it over 5 times. TCU had another touchdown that probably should have been reversed that wasn't. I don't think it was as crazy as that final score really indicated. And TCU isn't that good. And I think both teams coming off of bye obviously is kind of a wash for the Horned Frogs. But for me, this is a ton of value. I expect it to come down closer to 10. And I can see maybe a couple points of extra perception going TCU's way after that big Oklahoma State win. But getting 13.5 is just crazy. So there's not much more that needs to be said. This is my biggest edge I think I have this week. And it'll definitely be worth a shot, like I said, on the money line as well. So West Virginia plus the points. And if you're listening, you're betting these, grab some money line before it comes down.
Yeah, TCU has looked great, but yeah, I hear you. 13.5 points is 13.5 points, and that's what West Virginia is catching in that one. I'm going to do these out of order here. I'm going to go Stanford. Now, I say this with a big gulp here. Stanford giving 4.5 at Utah. Was it 4 here at the South Point? Let me see what the consensus is so I don't cheat Preston here on the 3-on-3. Stanford on the road. A favorite at Utah. Now, this is, I know it's dicey. Mitch Moss, by the way, just said he loved Utah in this game. My only deal with Utah is this. They've beaten North Dakota, BYU, San Jose State, and Arizona. I'm not sure what we really know about the Utes based on that schedule. The Cardinals certainly shaky early. They've picked it up a bit against UCLA, rolling past ASU themselves. Again, not a murderer's row, I understand, but 405 yards of offense, 5 touchdowns against UCLA. Kept it going against the ASU with 331 yards, averaging over 10 yards per carry. Bryce Love, 564 yards over the course of those 2 games. 1,088 yards in the first 5 games, 11 yards per carry. We don't know the status of Tyler Huntley here for the Utes. I am going to go with my preseason projection in this one. This is where I'm going to fight recency on Stanford, and I'm going to go with what I felt about the Cardinal prior to the season, and do believe that if Stanford, it was one thing to cover, which I'm betting on here, but if they can get the win here, this might be sort of a rebirth to Stanford's season, and they might start thinking things about going into Pac-12 conference, Pac-12 championship play. That starts to seep back into their head if they win this football game. I'm taking Stanford on the road, giving the 4.5.
Yeah, this game's really intriguing to me for what it's worth. I mean, all the money's been coming in on Utah, and it's pretty sharp. It's moved it down. I think it used to be 6.5 earlier in the week. So it's hard to blame them in this spot going into the altitude into Salt Lake. But you look at the schedule stuff, and like I said, it's really general, but I think it's worth taking into account. I mean, Stanford's had 10 times the tougher schedule. Utah hasn't really played anyone yet. Quarterback's questionable. I believe he's going to play, but he's going to be playing injured. My play here, I actually like the over quite a bit. You have a Stanford team and Bryce Love that's just been running over everyone, but Stanford's defense this year, 92nd in the country, giving up 6 yards per play. They're not as good. They're not what they've been. And granted, some of that's probably schedule worthy, but going on the road, I actually like, I think 50.5, 51. My last pick here to wrap this up, I have Houston minus 6.5. I bet it earlier in the week at 5.5, and I recommended it up to 7. This is one, my number's 10.5, and SMU, a team that actually has, I hate doing this, and when it comes down to it, I have to do it if I have to do it. But SMU, I think they're undefeated against the spread. So I'm running into that train of SMU Mustangs that just hasn't lost. I think there was a small window one week against TCU. They were at 19.5 and it landed 20. But as far as the closing lines go or the day of the games, they've covered all their spreads. Houston, on the flip side, struggled at Temple last week, lost at home to Texas Tech as pretty big favorites. They've had a quarterback change now to Pottsmouth, who's the backup to Greg Ward Jr. the last few seasons. He's been better, and I think this is just a nice value bet because you're getting a Houston team that looks like they've been struggling. I mean, two years ago, Houston would have been laying like 28 at home to SMU, and you have to give so much credit to SMU and how far they've come now just in 2 short seasons. But this number is ridiculously low, and obviously getting under a 7 has a ton of value, and even a 10 where my number says it should be 10.5. So I'm laying the points with Houston to wrap up my 3-pack.
I'm doing this off of memory. SMU 5-0 against the spread thus far this season in college football. Wasn't SMU the best ATS team in college basketball this past year as well?
Were they?
Yeah.
I'm not sure the actual numbers was, but there was like a 20-game streak where they covered 17 or something.
Let me call that up. 22-7-1. SMU, best team in college basketball against the spread. So SMU, certainly for bettors, both in basketball and football, doing their thing. Now, you know where I'm going with my final one, Preston. Oh, yeah. You know
I absolutely do.
Yeah. I always save it for last, and it's the simplest analysis. I'm taking Bama. End of story. I took them 2 weeks ago against Vanderbilt, 59-3 win, where they out first downed Vandy 38-3. I believe they were laying 19 that day. Then against Ole Miss last week, I think they were laying 28.5. Rolled them. Bama's won those last 2 games by a combined score of 125-3. Is that good? 125-3,
yeah.
2 games. Perhaps by some measure, really, by maybe just that measure and any other measure, the most dominant 2-game stretch of the entire Nick Saban era, if you want to put it that way. Vandy and Ole Miss converted 1 of 23 tries on third downs, by the way, in those 2 games as well. And the only analysis I need here, Alabama giving 26.5. And by the way, Kevin Sumlin, for all the heat he gets, Texas A&M, when you look up, they are 4-1. So you take that Josh Rosen game out, and Kevin Sumlin has a clean sheet this year. But Alabama giving 26.5 on the road is simply not enough, in my opinion. And last time I looked, Kelly Mond was still a freshman, and Bama is my 3rd pick. Your thoughts, Preston?
Yeah, I tend to lean your side. I think a lot of sharp guys are going to be Texas A&M at an astronomical number. But I agree. You say that, A&M now, they're 4-1. Okay, they're fine. Still have a freshman at quarterback who can't throw the ball very well. He can run it, but probably not as well against the Alabama defense. And you still have to remember, Nicholls State, they were tied at the 4th quarter. They had to come back against Louisiana Lafayette. They had to come back against Arkansas. And even against South Carolina last week, they ended up winning by 7. But I think they were down 10 late in the 3rd. So they've had these ends of games where you kind of not lucked, but they've earned them. But they've had to come back and kind of reevaluate where they're at in the game and make adjustments, and they've done them. But against Alabama, it's not going to work. So laying a huge number, I can't blame you, and Alabama's been covering for you anyway.
Just rolling with the tide. Rolling with the tide. See how I did that, Preston? Let's review. There is our picks for the day. Mine are on top. Now, to be fair, I'm looking at consensus. So I was talking about Kentucky being a 9.5-point favorite. The guys behind the glass are going to kill me. It's actually 10 now, consensus. So it's Kentucky minus 10 for our record keeping. Alabama is giving 26.5 at Texas A&M. Stanford, though, I get the half-point back. It is actually minus 4 consensus on Stanford. So Stanford would be minus 4 at Utah. Those are my 3, Kentucky, Bama, and Stanford. Preston going Toledo, giving 2 touchdowns against Eastern Michigan. Houston giving 6.5 versus SMU, and West Virginia catching 13.5 at number 8 TCU. Preston, let's get going. I enjoyed it. And by the way, for those who are wondering, hey, how can we get more of Preston Johnson besides the podcasts? Tomorrow, 10 to noon with Ron Flatter and Amal Shaw. You will be sitting in talking college football in-game stuff with them as well, correct?
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. It should be fun. Hopefully we all make some money live.
Yeah, that's 10 to noon Pacific, by the way, 1 to 3 Eastern for those listening on the East Coast. Preston, appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Yep, thanks for having me on.
All right, man. Gill Alexander on the way. Going to talk to Vinny Maliulo. Going to review this football game last night, baseball, look ahead to baseball as well. Coming up on A Numbers Game at VSiN.
It's A Numbers Game, live from the tip of the strip in Las Vegas. Get your fill of numbers even after the show is over by following the crew on Twitter, @BeatingTheBook and @VSiN Live.